All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Smart Talks by the Elizabeth Smart Foundation. I am Elizabeth Smart and I'm here with my co-host Mio Strong, and actually today it's a very special day. We have a whole family with us. Well, not a whole family, but a partial family with us today. And we also have someone who I have known for a number of years, and she's amazing. She's been a victim advocate. She's worked in law enforcement. She's worked in the Department of Justice. She's an incredible advocate for women, specifically women and families who have been affected by sex crimes or by murder. She's just all around an amazing woman. And her name is Sylvia. Sylvia and all of Jessica and Josh and Chelsea, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have you. Sylvia, I wanted to start off talking with you just for a minute briefly at the beginning, just talking about why are the missing and murdered Indigenous women so underserved? I mean, why do we not hear about their stories?
Good question. The issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women gets so little acknowledgement, so little media coverage, and most importantly, so little response from our community systems. And so it's especially imperative to talk about not only the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, but the high level, disproportionately high level of violent crimes violence against Indigenous women as well. These are cases that are hugely underreported. They don't receive the same type of attention so often as non-Native cases, and it's really imperative that people understand the disparities between these families, these Native families, Indigenous families who are coping with the aftermath of a missing and murdered loved one and trying to navigate the system and how difficult that is. And while it's important for Chelsea's family to speak today, and they've done this so well and been so courageous and strong, I want us to remember that there are many, many more families that don't have a platform to speak from that would give a similar description and experience of trying to navigate the system to find justice for their loved ones.
Well, I'm so glad that Chelsea and Josh and Jessica, that you are all with us here today, because I mean, I'll never forget, it was actually briefly before I met Sylvia, I actually spoke in North Dakota, and it was really close to one of the reservations. And while I was there, I had one of the women come up to me, and she started telling me about what was going on in the reservations and how Native and Indigenous women are disproportionately murdered and missing and abused, and they just have little to no resources. And I was really shocked. I didn't know. I had no idea. And then I feel like it was only like a few days later, I met Sylvia for the first time. And then we probably had another, couple hour conversation about this very topic. And it's just stayed with me ever since then. And every time that I have gone out or I've spoken, I've always been really, really interested in this topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, why their stories aren't covered, why are the statistics so high, why don't people hear about it? Why don't people know about it? And so I'm just so grateful that you would be willing to come forward today and share as much as you feel comfortable sharing. Obviously, this, I hope for everyone watching, you all understand like what a serious topic this is, and how this is like opening up, has the potential to open up a lot of pain, and that's the last thing that we want to do here today. But so I want to really thank you for being here and being willing to talk about it, because I do feel like it's a very, very important topic, and people need to hear about it. People need to know what's happening. So thank you.
Thank you. we're really thankful for the opportunity, because it's, I mean, like you said, this is really hard for some people to get their recognition out there for their cases. And so we feel extremely privileged to have had the support that we've had. And even though it's not worked out, you know, on the police side of it and the investigation side of it, for us, like on the other side, the support side it's been huge. And we appreciate that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you've received good support along the way, because not having gone through like the tragedy of losing somebody that you love and then not having support, I mean, that's like one by itself is too much already. But if you had to deal with both, that would just be horrendous. And as Sylvia was saying, we know that so many families they do have to deal with not only the loss of a loved one, but not having support there for them either. So thank you. I was hoping that maybe you could begin by talking a little bit about your mother and what happened, as much or as little as you feel comfortable sharing.
Josh, I'll say a little bit first, and then you can say or interject wherever you want to. Our mom, Christine, she the light in many people's lives. She was a GM at her company she was working. She's very driven, very outgoing. She's kind of like the light in the room. You can't miss her. Whether she liked you or not, you felt like $1,000,000 when you left the room away from her. It was August 7th of 2017 was the last time I had a conversation at night with her. She was kind of like on the tail end of her relationship, and she was kind of like in a little bit of a depression, upset, and kind of vocal with each of us, because we were all adults, so we were all very close with her, kind of like friends too. You know, you get to that point where you like really appreciate your parents for not only the things you put them through, but as you have kids of your own, you recognize how much they did and continue to do for you. And so that closeness was there with her, with each of us. And she had called me that night. The kids were about to start school the next day, and she had sent money for school clothes because she was so adamant about taking care of her grandbabies. And we just had a quick conversation. She was complaining about her relationship, and it was okay. She was going to go back to work. And then the next morning, I couldn't reach her, which was very unlikely because she was a general manager, like I said, so she had her phone. She was always reachable. And so I had reached out to her office, to my sister. Like, I was just like, she's not answering her phone. This is so unlike her. And I was kind of a little panicky because of it, but at the same time, kind of in the back of my mind, like, oh, she's fine. I don't know. Maybe she's just in a meeting or, and then work said she didn't show up, which was like, something's wrong. So then we had sent up her coworker, one of her friends, who had to drive up into the mountain because she lived up a little ways from the town in Fairbanks, Alaska. And we didn't get a call back. And so that was kind of stressful. And at that point, we kind of just had this really dark feeling. And then her neighbor posted on her Facebook, RIP Chris. And so the rest of us.
That's how they found out. That's how the family found out.
Oh my gosh.
So we immediately started, my brother's like, I was, I can't say where my siblings were, but I was on my hands and knees screaming. My brother was trying to reach through to her neighbor, and why would you post this? And, we're mad and angry. Like, how is this true? How do you know it? And he's like, well, I saw them take her body out, And so our world literally shattered in 1,000 pieces with no answers, no questions, no details. And the friend who had gone up to the house and found her was told by the troopers that she could not reveal information to us, and that's why she couldn't call us. But because the neighbor put it on Facebook, the troopers essentially had to call next of kin, which would have been my older brother Josh here. And so this is pretty much the whirlwind of confusion, of tragedy, of grief for us, because it's like we don't see her. We haven't talked to her. Like we haven't really gotten official confirmation of what exactly happened. All we know is the neighbor posted something, and there's this sketchiness between nobody wanting to tell us anything. And obviously we're all, you know, far away. And so the confusion just kind of set in, what next? We need to get to Alaska. You know, we need to get there. And I think that was the beginning of this whole tragedy and us searching for answers. And I say that lightly because who I am today, who Josh is today, who Jessica is today, it's not who we were then. You know, we were little kids. We were adults, but our mom was still like, she's the matriarch of us. You know, she led us. She still was that comfort, that teddy bear we went to when our worlds are falling apart. And with her hurt or gone or questions, like, the grief is too unmanageable to even figure out how to answer these questions that most people think when someone passes away or dies, the police will do their job or the troopers will do their, somebody will give you answers. There's always this black and white, but we were completely in gray. Like, and there was no upper person to say, this is what happened, this is right, or explain. It was just gray. And in those moments, I think you're so lost in despair that the minutes feel like hours, you know, and you just can't breathe, and you can't ask anyone anything. You can't get the answers. You literally just have to live in the moment as the moments pass until something else makes sense. And it was that way for weeks. You know, even after we flew into Alaska, we were constantly, they had sent her body from Fairbanks to Anchorage. We couldn't see her. The medical examiner would not let us come and see her body. So we, at that point, you know, the troopers had just basically said, oh, she fell. It was an accident.
It took them 6 hours to call me from the point where that guy their neighbor posted to the trooper contacting me. It was 6 hours of us waiting to hear what was going on, what had happened, why.
Oh, goodness.
Knowing they had no information too, by the way, knowing they had no information other than what was on Facebook.
Yeah, the only person that we had contact with to go up there and find out what was going on with, they had told to not contact us. And so they
Right.
knew that we had no contact whatsoever, no information other than the neighbor posting what he posted.
Right.
It
Which
was
compounded everything, made
yeah,
it
was
much
pretty
worse.
Like, don't give them information because this is
Right.
how we control this situation. Right. Where is it going to go? We control it because we don't give out information. We don't give them the opportunity to question anything. And at that point, we didn't even realize that. We were just totally like, the law is supposed to call us and they're going to make it, you know, we're going to get information. The autopsy will show something and it'll just all make sense. But it just wasn't that case.
No.
It just, and the more we learned, the more it became that situation. Like, where you're just pulling your own hair out and scratching your head. Like, from, you know, we got to Anchorage, we had to wait to see her body, and we had to transfer her from the medical examiner to a funeral home. And because she's at a funeral home, we had to figure out her funeral. We had to figure out what we're going to do with her body. We still don't know what happened to our mom, and you want us to plan a funeral and decide if we're going to cremate her or bury her or where we're burying her. So it's this small, tiny crunch of time. Your whole world is literally in 1,000 pieces on the ground, and they're forcing you to glue it together. You can't. And then, you know, but you're supposed to. So it was just a really hard, you know, where do you go from here? How do you even get answers? And the medical examiner won't give information because the troopers are saying something and they're busy. And they're saying, we have so many cases, it's so busy, we have to wait until the toxicology reports get back, which takes 8 weeks. So Josh and I went to Fairbanks after we sorted out and handled her funeral. You know, we sent her to the funeral home, and looking at her, it was obvious. She was beaten. She had bruises to her exterior, to her face, her whole neck was swollen, her eye, like, it was just like, are you kidding me? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And we didn't get to look at the whole part of her body because they did an autopsy. So she's in the little jumpsuit. And so there are so many details that I want to say naive. We don't know what questions to ask. We are not investigators. We are children grieving. But we were forced to become investigators and learn to ask these questions because it was just astounding that these were not provided, or that there wasn't this black and white. It was just, we were just swimming in gray, drowning in gray, I say. And Josh and I went to Fairbanks, you know, and we're like, forget this. Like, we're gonna go and we're gonna talk to those troopers, and we're gonna go to her job, we're gonna dig in her computer, we're gonna get her phone, like, we're gonna do all these things, you know, this doesn't make sense. And the more we dug, you know, we got to Fairbanks, we went into her cabin and to her house, and it did not make sense. Like, the pool of blood where she laid last, to where her stairs were, to what they were claiming she fell, it physically could not happen. Even if, like, trajectory, like, we went through things like if she was pushed, or if it just could, where she was located, it could not physically happen. And then you factor in, at this point, we're in her cabin looking at things. We still don't have the autopsy report. So I don't have a report showing me what ribs were broken and where her bruises and lacerations were exactly. But I know from when I looked at her at the funeral home, it wasn't right. There's way more damage. And she didn't have scrapes on her arms from tumbling down somewhere. Or So this is just us literally regular young kids mourning and grieving their mom with so many questions, asking questions that you're forced to ask. You know, you're coming out of your shell and you're thinking, this just doesn't make sense. How can I figure this out? And the more, you know, my dad was there. My mom and dad have been divorced for years, but good friends. We're all adults. They have grandkids. They, you know, he came with us, and he's like the neighbor. Like, there's just so many of us who are looking at the cabin and the situation, and we're like, this doesn't make sense. The body bag trash that they used on the ground in her cabin, the gloves they used to look at her house, piling over her trash.
Oh my gosh.
They didn't even clean up. They didn't even clean up after themselves.
It was
all discarded.
It was almost like, in this situation, this woman doesn't have a lot of family nearby.
Right.
Nobody's going to question it. We're going to close it. It's going to be
matter to them.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
is
talked to
there a
that trooper.
protocol for that?
So that's what I asked. You know, this is I'm telling you, you get to the point where you start, like, you're so baffled by how this is a thing. Like, how is this possible? So we left there, you know, we went in, we dug into, we went to her job, we went through her work things, we talked with her coworkers, we talked with the friend that actually went up, and she's like, even I went back to the state trooper's office and asked, do you need to ask me anything? Do you need to interview me? Because nobody asked me any questions, and I'm the one who found her body. So she was like, it wasn't right. Something wasn't right. Something is being covered up. Something was not right, you know? And so it was just like, the more we looked into things, the more we found. Yet the excuse was, there's no autopsy to say right or wrong. There's, you know, when that comes, then we can seal the deal on what this case really is.
But they didn't even need that part. Chelsea, may I just interject one thing? Because I reviewed the crime scene photographs in detail, and her injuries were not consistent with the story of falling and being unattended at all. They were completely inconsistent. So even without that autopsy report, there should have been a basic determination that this was not simply an unattended death, but a homicide.
And I feel like the reason why that was, Sylvia, was because of the disconnect between the offices. So if they're taking information from an office in a small town in Alaska far away, and it's going to a busy central office in a big city in the same state, and they're dealing with they're taking the word of these law enforcements in this small town. They're going to believe the law, the people who are there to protect and the people who are investigating. So they're just like, okay, they say they fell, she has some bruises and stuff. They never looked at a picture of what her stairs look like or where she was in the cabin.
No,
that was the biggest disconnect in facts, was between the troopers and the medical examiner, because the troopers stated on their report she fell downstairs. And so when the medical examiner looked at her and saw the injuries, they're like, well, yeah, she has broken ribs, she has, you know, all these lacerations, this contusions, this is consistent with falling downstairs. But the thing is, her stairway is a spiral stairs, and it's about 6.5, maybe 7 feet high. So she fell 7 feet, and somehow she has broken ribs on the front and back. She's got bruises all over her body. She has a head contusion that goes from her whole forehead was crumpled like halfway back.
Oh my.
And nowhere near her stairs was there a sign of falling. You know, you fall, you grab something. Oh, it's an
Nothing
accident.
was broken. Nothing was chipped. There was no blood.
Nothing.
There was a
Nothing.
tall standing lamp right next to where she fell, and she didn't hit that, didn't touch it, nothing. There was no disturbance of any of the things below it.
And when you say, you know, we're grateful for this opportunity, we surely are. But the noise level that I was able to produce, little old me, the questions, you know, I teach, but I learn to ask questions, right? And I feel as though I do not believe that it was just me. I believe I prayed and I sought and I said, this doesn't make sense. We need closure. I cannot move forward. And every time I did, tiny mercies, these little tender mercies, doors would open. And when they felt unsafe, they would close. But these answers came to me little by little by little, enough to make us know we're not crazy. Some person in law enforcement who did or didn't do their job, I don't speak for everyone, some person who may know more about the situation, some person who might have details that we don't understand or know, someone knows what happened. You know, somebody did that to her. If it is unsafe for me, then and it is unsafe for there to be a clear-cut answer of justice for us, if at that time I wasn't willing to accept that. I wanted justice. I wanted to know, I wanted right to be right and wrong to be wrong. Like, it's not fair that someone took her from us. And then on top of that, someone's telling us that she just was drinking alcohol and fell. Like, you don't know her. And you can't put an image on what she is because of a lack of investigation. And I have to be the investigator to solve this? Are you kidding me? And all the noise I made and all the people I pissed off in that office because of the noise I made and all the barking I did, I still had these opportunities. Like Sylvia said, Sylvia presented herself to me. She reached out to me. She offered me as an advocacy. She said, call this number. You know, these are God-given tender mercies that Sylvia herself, if Sylvia hadn't presented herself to me, I wouldn't know which avenues to walk to. And so when you talk about, you know, the Indigenous women or the families, like, it really is the people who step in and help us. And I called and and then I went to a therapist because I was drowning in depression, and the therapist, you know, I was able to express myself to her, and she presented me with a friend of hers who was an FBI agent, and he looked over the case and he said himself, like, in my 25 years of FBI work in that state, I have never seen such a small case folder. There was no investigating done. Her physical injuries do not explain in any way what actually happened to her. I'm looking at these crime scene photos. People don't die when they fall off lost. I don't care how much alcohol you have in your body. They didn't interview the woman who found her. There's so much lack and flags in this case that he was astounded and wanted to look into it for free. Like, he was like, I can't believe I'm looking at this in the state I worked in and served in. This is disgraceful. And so these are the kind of opportunities that opened and were confirming to us. And just as they were opened, you know, the person that my mom was involved in a relationship with was also has said to been a part of organized crime, had a little dabble in possibly some kind of drugs selling. And so it was a little bit scary to me to be looking through her phone records and to be finding some of the things that I was finding. And at this point, this is where I started to realize we're finding all of these things to provide that we know she was murdered, and that this case should not be closed and called an accident, that her life insurance that she had should not be looking at our mother as some woman who who got drunk and fell. You know, that we should not be labeled with not only grieving our mother in a sudden death, but she should not be labeled as some drunk who fell off her loft. It's disgraceful and it's not fair. And we should not have to fight so hard to have people to look and do their job. And so in this whole process, I printed out all the stuff. I had compiled this huge 28-page letter. Like, we dug through her cell phone records, and her boyfriend was on her phone line. So she had actually like found out that the boyfriend was talking to another woman who worked on the slope with him. And my mom had found out, and the phone records started crisscrossing. And this is when relationship problems were happening, and she was trying to leave him. And the neighbor, and just like I compiled letters from friends, things that she had been saying in the month leading up, evidence showing, you know, things that she wasn't even home right when I called her that night before. So how could she have been so intoxicated that she fell and to her death? You know, things that just don't add up. Her last call being right after I talked to her, which would have been right as she was either getting home or something happened to her before she got home and she was put there. You know, there are a lot of unexplained things, but there's enough to say that this should be investigated. And I can tell you that if we're experiencing this and we dug this far, I can't imagine the amount of people around the world that have experienced this type of pain and loss, this type of loneliness that not only haunts you with grief and tragedy, but with self-doubt and second-guessing yourself as to who your loved one really was. Because people are telling you they're somewhere else. She's some drunk who fell off a loft, and we know better than that. And people are telling you that it shouldn't be investigated, and we know better than that. People are telling you that it's something that it's not. And if I didn't listen to every prompting, or I didn't walk towards every door opened, I wouldn't have the confidence that I have today. And it breaks my heart to think of those who don't have that, who sit and they grieve and they're stuck and they never open, they don't have those open doors to figure out and find any kind of closure to the pain that just sits, you know? And I can tell you, it's a closed case. It's an accident. It was just labeled an accident. And so no investigating will be done. Per the lieutenant in that office, he told me, no investigating will be done unless you can provide us with hard evidence. So it's my job to get you to do your job.
Oh my gosh. And you have a stack of hard evidence and seems like zero rights. Like, it's not, I'm with you. Like, I feel everything and the frustration, and I can't imagine. I mean, because you did everything. You guys took your pain and your grief and you channeled it to action.
Yeah.
And because of that, you have these answers, and I can't fathom that the people in charge, it's falling on deaf ears.
Yeah. And it's obvious types of evidence material that were presented to law enforcement. One of the things, and if you don't want me to say this, we can cut this out, but one of the things is footage from the neighbor's security camera that shows a car leaving their mom's property, speeding away at the exact time of death, around 2 a.m. That came straight from her driveway, looked at and addressed. The other thing that's important to keep in mind when we're talking about the disproportionately high numbers of violence against Native and Indigenous women is that she, as Chelsea said, she was trying to leave a relationship, and it was extremely dangerous for her. She was trying to keep herself safe and do it in the right time, and consider that certain things need to be in place for her to feel safe to leave, enough to leave. 75% of women who are seriously injured or murdered by their partners are harmed during separation. It's not during the relationship, the course of the relationship. It's when that control and power is being threatened by the abuser, it's almost like all sense of accountability and reason and logic goes out the window, out the door. And it's that whole mindset of, if I can't have you, no one can. And that drives them to seriously injure or murder their loved one. And so there's that comes into play here as well.
And then, you know, there's the sitting in the trooper's office, you know, demanded to see the person in charge because no one had called me. They called my brother, gave him very little information, didn't follow back with him, called and told him to come pick up her belongings that they had found, you know, around her, like her phone and her purse. And so I went in and I demanded to see someone because I wanted explanation. I don't have an autopsy. I don't know. You're telling me I'm hearing from this and that, and the medical examiner won't let me go in and see her yet, but I can tell you I looked at her body. This doesn't make sense. And he said, I said, did you guys fingerprint? Because her house, your guys' gloves from examining are hanging out of her trash. There's bloody paper towels. There's the autopsy bag laying on the floor in her living room and the trash that you guys left there. You know, right where I look at the blood that came from my mother's body, that's your trash. So I don't know if this is negligence or what this is, but that doesn't look like a thorough job to me. Did you take fingerprints? And he said, well, honestly, they thought it was an accident and didn't think I needed to come because he's the homicide investigator. And he said, but something didn't feel right to me, so I went up anyway. And when he got there, I said, so in all your years of work, you guys didn't do any fingerprinting to see who came in and out of her door, even though, because this was an unattended death? And he said, no, it didn't seem like there was a break of entry. And I said, okay, so I'm gonna ask you this. If she fell, it doesn't explain. We did the math. We looked at her location of where she was. We stood upstairs. I don't care if her stairs look dangerous. I don't care if there were bottles of alcohol in her house. I don't care if whatever theory you have of an accident. I'm talking science and I'm talking math. This doesn't make sense. And mind you, this is before we had an autopsy report, confirming even more broken bones, fractured ribs, confirming every single detail, right? So I asked him, I said, so what if she didn't fall? What if someone pushed her? What if someone beat her? So you're saying it had to look like someone broke into her house for that to happen? And he said, no, actually, in all my years of homicide work, 90% of the time when people are murdered in their homes, it's by someone they know. So I said, okay, so you did no fingerprinting, but you're telling me this. And I almost kind of got the feeling from him as if it was above his head. Like he was told not to go, but he went anyway because he wanted to be thorough. He took the photos and he was kind of saying these details to me, but he was saying, unless you give me more information, like it's out of my hands. I can't do more investigating. So that's what I did. From that point on, I tried to give him more information. I dug in her cell phone. If you're not going to dig in it, I'm going to get her phone records. I can log in and get that information. I can trace every single person, every phone call, and find out who they are. You know, I had even traced his call, her significant other, because he had a phone line under her, and he had made a call to a doctor in Northern California who had a chain of pain medication centers. And he called this person, this doctor who was being investigated by the FBI on federal and felony charges. He called him right after he found out, right after the post went up that my mom had passed. So almost like he saw it on her page, because even maybe he didn't know. I don't know. I don't have all the details, but he makes this phone call after it's public that she's gone, and he calls this doctor. Not to mention that we had found 2 huge, like pharmacy-sized, unopened bottles of prescription medication, Xanax, in her home with plastic on it, like the big white ones that you see in the pharmacy. Like, why would she have those? So to me, if I'm connecting the dots, something is definitely not right. I don't know that it's maybe all like, oops, we should have investigated that more, or there's actually something being covered up. But to me, it was enough to say it makes sense why It should have been black and white. Oh, wow, we found this new information. Oh, the autopsy says the back of her ribs were evenly broken in the back. That doesn't explain falling down the stairs. So we're gonna do some more investigating. There was none of that. It was just case closed. We're pushing for it to be an accident because that's what we wanted it to be originally. That we want to close that case. It's done. We don't, investigating that would, I don't know.
So the hard evidence they're waiting for, is that what, for this guy to come in and confess? Is that what it would take for them to like reopen it?
Yeah. I don't know.
Probably.
I had questions. I mean, the night that the trooper called me, I already had questions involving this man because my mom had, maybe the week before, she had said she'd fell, but she had injured her hip or her leg, and she was all bruised really badly. And we assumed it was just another one of the things that happened between her and this guy because she was on the way trying to get out of this relationship. And so the first thing I asked the trooper, I said, well, did you check her phone to see who she had talked to last? And they just went off of, they talked to the neighbor briefly, and they were like, oh yeah, the last person she talked to was the neighbor at 11 p.m. And we're like, well, how do you know? Because you talked to the neighbor. That might have been the neighbor talked to her at 11, but who knows who else she talked to after that? Because we had no access to the phone. Her phone was locked, and she had changed the password recently, so we couldn't get into her phone, and we had no avenues of approach to get information that way because we just assumed, oh well, the law enforcement will check those things for us, and they'll be able to track that data to see what's going on with there. But it was just, oh no, the last person she talked to was the neighbor at 11 p.m.
And looking at her phone records, the text messages that the neighbor showed weren't on her phone records. So that's confusing, right? It's like, wait, what about the last person, the only person? It's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. Technically on her phone records, the last person she talked to was her boyfriend via text. And when I asked him what was the conversation about, he was very defensive. He was, oh, why? How come? And so there were so many red flags turning up all over the place that it was just like, I don't even know who, when, what, and where to believe anymore. The people that I should be taking for gold and listening to the things they're saying, they're not willing to do it. They have the capability to get more information than we can. We even sought out AT&T trying to manage getting into her phone to see the actual messages that were going through versus just the number and who texted at one time or who called at one time for how long. And it was a breach of privacy, and there were all these links of, and we went down that avenue, and it wasn't a possibility.
We were told by AT&T and Apple that the law enforcement would be the ones that would have to contact them.
They're the only people who could gain that information, yeah. So, and that in itself was who exactly and what exactly was said, so that's evidence in itself, but they were unwilling to get the evidence. So I made a huge stink. I went to the FBI office. I got a contact from Sylvia in Anchorage, and I said, I brought up the prescription bottles that were found in her house. I brought up the boyfriend situation. I brought up all the information that I had taken to the troopers that I compiled and provided to them, and how they were just like denying it and wouldn't investigate. And they were like, what? So they started coming down on the troopers asking, like, what's going on here? Why are we getting calls from, this person's daughter? And what is this case? And so their lieutenant was really pissed with me because he was looking back. He's getting a stink from above him who's asking what they're doing in their office. And I'm assuming they have a lot of cases and a lot of things they're doing. Like a death, an unattended death, probably in their life, they deal with many of them in a day. But this one case, I was relentless. Josh was relentless. We weren't going to let it go. And I became like a little fly hovering around their ear. And so he was really annoyed with me. And so they took one more step to call the boyfriend and ask him and interview him about where he was. And he provided a pay stub. His pay stub was his alibi. So it says that he was on the North Slope on or around the time she died. How does a pay stub provide that if you get paid salary? I don't understand how that provides. And even the detective that I talked to, he said, no, there's several checkpoints on the North Slope. that you have to go through. It's a very highly secure place. When you go in and out of somewhere, there are way more secured ways to provide whether someone was there or not. A pay stub, I don't know how they took that for word. I don't know how they used that as his alibi. And then that was later added to the police report after I had made a big stink. And that was enough for them to say, we're not doing any more. Now you made all your noise. We checked out the boyfriend and we're good, because they made one phone call. And so at that point, I had become relentless, angry, but also these doors were closing and I felt it was for a reason, and so it just became this place of, okay, I don't know what to do next, and I'll wait for the opportunity to present itself. And then we dealt with a whole new tragedy and trauma. Not even 2 months after this time of looking into the case where my brother Josh and his daughter got into a car accident and his daughter didn't make it. And so we've dealt with tragedy. And at this point, this is when we kind of stopped digging into Mom's case.
Kind of derailed us a little bit.
Yeah. So this is where we are today. Tomorrow makes 3 years. It's been a long journey. We've had a lot of pain, especially Josh and his wife, Nohea. In this journey that we've been on, this horrible, bumpy roller coaster that we call life. And so this has pretty much been Mom's case.
Oh my gosh. I am heartbroken for your entire family, especially for you, Josh. I'm genuinely so sorry. Not only for losing your mother, but your little girl as well. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
What can we do to help?
We honestly, I felt like we've done all that we physically can do, but maybe the platforms and the help of someone else who can hear this and see this and take it into action. And if not for justice for Mom, maybe the words we share today will bring hope and light to someone who travels through these same dark roads. Maybe I say this because a lot of times when someone is grieving, people like to provide what they think is hope. And they, often the term in the LDS culture, which we belong to, is families are forever. Or it's okay, just hold on to this. But I want people women and families who go through dealing with a murdered loved one or a lost loved one who's never found. It is okay to feel. It is okay to be mad and be angry. And it is okay to know that those feelings are a part of your grief, and your grief is not the same as everyone else's. And it's okay for others to help by just listening. You don't have to have the perfect words to say. And it is okay to take that pain and turn it into purpose. Because Josh and I can both attest to the pain doesn't get less. It doesn't hurt any less the more the days go by. Because often I hear people, it gets easier with time. It doesn't get easier, you get stronger. Mm-hmm. And like any day, tomorrow marking 3 years, I can feel my bones shaking and I can see my body falling to my knees in the moment that I got the news. It doesn't get any less, but that is okay. And it is okay to grapple with that and know that you are so strong and you are so resilient, and the person that you love is present, whether physically, and they can help you. They have more capability beyond the veil, or in many different respects of culture or beliefs. People might name it and say it in different ways. But I physically believe that my mom has worked beyond her limits from where she is to provide us with the closure and the knowledge that we have, to help us to continue to be resilient and strong. And so I just hope that, one, we can hopefully get some justice for her, some real real justice. And two, that all of those families who go through the pain and the trauma and the tragedy, that they may know that they're not alone, that they know that it is okay to feel, it's okay to hurt, but it's also okay to accept that there is hope even with that pain. They're kind of coupled together. It's never, you don't have this big light and all of a sudden the pain is done. That's your new journey. Your new journey is accepting that life is going to be very painful, but very hopeful. There's gonna be light all along the way. Josh, I'm pretty sure you might have some feelings about what you might want that would be different than me.
I mean, I'm just happy for the exposure, but also to the same reference of knowing that other people are going through the things that you're going through, because losing a parent is tough. I mean, they're not, you're supposed to lose your parents at some point in your life, but never prematurely and never taken from you by someone else on purpose. And so that's a tough struggle, but because you get all the platitudes, I'm so sorry for your loss, and it's over and over again, and it's constant, and that tends to in itself become a reminder of the pain. Every time you hear someone try to tell you, oh, it's gonna be okay, but coming from someone who's experienced it, I think it's a little bit more genuine. You kind of realize, like, okay, well, this person understands how painful this is for me right now. And I mean, losing your child, that completely derailed all of our momentum that we had going forward with my mom's stuff. But I think I'm happy to be here because I think that, I mean, as you guys have heard and seen some of the details of their case, you walk into that cabin and look at the 7-foot drop, that it's impossible. It's impossible what they're telling us happened. And that's just layman. That's not a law enforcement person walking in there. That's just a normal person walking in and looking at that who go, this isn't right. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I hope that someone else out there, that maybe another door, like Chelsea was talking about, doors being open for us, maybe the exposure, someone somewhere else will be like, well, I know what I can do with this information and move it forward, because we're still fighting. We had a real rough patch there and kind of slowed us down, but we're still moving forward. We're still pushing. And I thank all of you for your help in our journey, because this is pretty huge for us to be able to talk about this with someone else who just really cares for this cause, for people like that just don't get the justice they deserve. They don't get the recognition that they should.
I hardly have words. The honor is all ours. And I mean, I know it's not easy to talk about like the worst moments of your life, because I've been there and I've spoken about my worst moments, and it's hard. And I feel such a debt of gratitude for both of you and your family as a whole being willing to open up and share as candidly and as openly as you have. And I don't think that this podcast will be in vain. I think that, well, I know it won't, because I'm going to keep on talking about it, and we're going to continue to share your story and other stories like yours, because everyone deserves everyone deserves justice. Sometimes I think that justice does come in different forms. I mean, for me, I think justice came in the form that I'm at peace with what's happened, and I know that my captors can never hurt anyone again. But justice for different people, I think, mean different things. And so I hope we can get justice for your mom. And I hope something does come from this podcast. I hope that, that torch is picked up, and we are here for you guys. If there's anything we can ever do for you, all you have to do is ask. And we will be there with bells and whistles on. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you have. I mean, it means a lot to me personally, and we won't let you down, I promise. And everyone else watching today, I hope that you truly feel as honored as I do to have been able to listen to Chelsea and Josh share their stories and their mother's story. It's a really big deal to be able to open up the way that they have. And it's a lot of vulnerability, and it takes a lot of courage. And to talk about things that are violent and graphic and difficult, I mean, it's hard. So I hope all of you realize like how special today really was. And I hope that if you are someone who has experienced something similar, you take hope from their example and you take strength from their example, and don't give up, and continue to fight for your loved ones. Continue to fight for your rights, and know that there are people on your side, and there are people out there who are willing to help you share your story. So with that being said, I want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in today. If you don't subscribe to us already, please make sure that you do. And a huge thank you to Chelsea and Josh. Like I said, if there's anything me personally or the foundation can do for you, please let us know. We will love to be involved. I would love to be involved or help in any way that we can. And Sylvia, I mean, as always, it's always good to hear from you, to hear your perspective, to have you,
Thank you.
On the podcast. And I look forward to having more conversations with you on this podcast, Sylvia.
Absolutely. May I say one thing briefly too? If there's anyone listening to this that is in a supportive role, or they themselves impacted by domestic violence, I wanted to make sure that they know that they're not alone, and that their safety is paramount in the situation. If they are dealing with this or even considering leaving, to remember that it can be the most dangerous time in their experience. And I wanted to offer a phone number that they could call. It's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and that's staffed by trained advocates and counselors 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That number is 1-800-799-7233 or 1-800-799-SAFE. I hope that's helpful. Please reach out.
I'm so glad you shared that, Sylvia. Yes, absolutely. Everyone, if you find yourself in a dangerous situation, if you're worried about your safety, if you're trying to get out of an abusive relationship, your safety is paramount. And I'm so glad, Sylvia, that you shared that number. Make sure you call them, because there are people, there are agencies who are here to help you. So with that being said, thank you again to all of you. Thank you to everyone tuning in, and God bless all of you.